I feel like this is a turbo specific situation that nobody's really talking about. Nobody ever really addresses because it's just another cope and a seethe from a demographic that cannot accept that Nintendo has won the console war. It doesn't matter that Sony is censoring their games. It doesn't matter that Xbox is censoring their games. It doesn't matter that the major PC platforms are censoring games, right? Like, oh, we can work around that. We can deal with it. It doesn't matter. Like, these are the mature, hardcore gaming platforms for adults. And nothing's going to change that, no matter what happens. Oh, but when Nintendo does it, when someone says that Nintendo is trying to censor them, it's time to release a statement. It's time to get angry. It's time to call Nintendo the most evil corporation known to man. And it doesn't even matter whether or not it's true. I've been talking about this a lot in regards to like mainline Nintendo games specifically, titles like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and Fire Emblem Engage. Games that constantly get hit with these allegations that the game has been unbelievably censored and ruined when that isn't actually true at all. When you take that into consideration, when you think about what's actually happening, when you look into it just a little bit, you realize that the narrative put forward by these people is completely and utterly false. Right? There is no like mass removal of content. There is no changing of story elements. There is no like censoring of female characters. It is all just a gigantic cope to try and downplay Nintendo and its brands. And it always has been, right? This isn't like a new thing. If anything, 10 years ago, these people like to pretend that Nintendo was the most censorship happy company out of like all of the big three. But like we all know that isn't true. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. But for some reason, there are a lot of people who come out and really desperately want to grift off of the idea anyway, right? Who still try to pretend this is a thing. Or more and more recently, pretend that it will be a thing very, very soon, right? So, recently, there were allegations that Nintendo of America censored Emiya the Smiling Man. Right. This was a claim that came out of nowhere. Sakamoto released a review, an interview with him and like that girl who wrote the story with him. They were talking about it, and somehow, for some reason, people got this idea that the game was censored for a Western audience. And of course, people went crazy. Like, Nintendo censored their games. Oh, they're listening to those Americans. Woke, 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 woke. And then, I'm sitting there, someone who actually played the game, who actually knows what he's talking about, who understands, like, what the game actually is. Okay? They didn't censor shit. You are talking about one of the darkest, bleakest Nintendo games ever produced, right? You're talking about a game where some guy goes on a murderous rampage, murdering a bunch of underage girls. Okay, you are talking about a game that really encompasses a lot of really positive conservative values, that does a really good job, like being a very traditional Japanese visual novel, right? Like, it's a good game, right? And it reminds me a lot of like the 13 Sentinels thing, where like people came out and spoke out about that. There is nothing wrong with the story to these games. Okay, but people look at like one or two line changes and start crying about like my localization. They're ruining our Japanese media without really understanding that like localization is a very necessary process when it comes to Japanese to English releases, right? Like you have to do it to a certain extent because the languages are so radically different. Like you do have to rewrite things, you do have to like adjust it. Like it's not unusual to see in the industry. There's a reason why it's become the standard. People always do this thing, well, like, well, novels don't do it. Novels aren't games, and as a result of that, like you do have to make certain changes depending on the region. But for some reason, you have people who don't understand this, who don't understand the purpose of localization to make a product that will be more appealing to its target demographic. And so they bend over backwards trying to create controversy where there is none. And one of the really weird things we keep seeing coming up, every year it feels like, is that there's always some minor indie dev, some little irrelevant studio producing some indie game with some sexual content. Some of these people come out and regularly give statements about how their game is being blacklisted by a Nintendo America. It's not allowed to come out on the Switch in the West. And so like people rally together and they're just like, no, Nintendo's censoring our games. They're stopping sexual content. Nintendo hates sex. They're woke, they're woke, they're woke. And the reality every single time it comes out that it's not true at all. It was a self-promotional tactic, and the entire narrative falls apart, only to be repeated by the next person who tries the same thing. People buy into it because they desperately want it to be true. They desperately want to see Nintendo fail by any means necessary. And a big part of that entails pretending that the company is constantly going downhill and making mistakes, is secretly being controlled by those evil Americans. Like they just don't actually look at the actual console and the actual games, because if you actually talked about Nintendo games, you would know that all of them are better than the very best that PlayStation or Xbox has to offer. Elden Ring, like fucking Emio outperformed that shit. That was a better game. Emio was a better game than that. Brothership was a better game. Echoes of Wisdom was a better game. Like, Princess Peach Showtime was a better game. You could have any random Nintendo release, and it's just better than Elden Ring, right? Like, they all are, right? There is nothing Nintendo has released this generation that's worse than Elden Ring. Pikmin 4 was better. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was better. There's just nothing Nintendo produces is as bad as the very best of what other companies produce. And this is like the elephant in the room that people really just don't want to admit. They can't bring themselves to admit it. PC gamers especially, they can't bring themselves to acknowledge that they backed the wrong horse. They got into PC gaming under this misconception that it was a free and open platform and they could do whatever they want and they could just pirate everything and they could sell porn of like video game characters. And when all of that imploded, they can't bring themselves to face it, right? They have to do this thing where, like, PC Master Race, and they spend all their time on YouTube, like, talking shit about, like, more relevant companies. As much as I hate PlayStation and Xbox, there is no denying that they are more relevant than PC gaming. Like, PC gaming is a niche thing for people who just have a PC for other purposes, right? Like, it's not a primarily gaming platform. It doesn't have there aren't like high profile companies producing high quality games exclusively for PC these days. It's just a declining platform. And nobody wants to acknowledge it. Nobody wants to face facts and admit that PC gaming and mobile cannot possibly compete with Nintendo.